Yeah, so thanks everyone for joining us today for the session from the Studio and Galleries team at the Manchester School of Art. Just a quick note that if you can keep your microphones muted and your videos off, this will help the session run smoother. If you do wish to ask a question, feel free to pop them in the chat throughout the session. My colleague Jedi is here monitoring the chat and she'll be going through them, and there'll be the opportunity to get those questions answered at the end of the session. If you are experiencing any IT difficulties at all, please do feel free to exit the Zoom and rejoin. We'll let you back in and hopefully that will help. And so we've got a little bit of a different session this morning. So we've got with us today Adam Butler, Broadley and Owen Ramsay, who have got a video for us on their work at the Fabric of the City installation in Manchester. So they'll be with us, we'll watch the video, and then there'll be the opportunity to pop any questions in the chat as the video goes, and then we'll get to those questions at the end of the session. So without further ado, we'll get going with the video.
Welcome to Manchester. Hello. Greg, how are we doing?
So this is Fabric of the City, an artwork by British textile artist Alice Kettle, and it's newly commissioned for the new Grosvenor building here at MMU. The artwork is about the city of Manchester itself. It's also influenced by the poem by Michael Simmons Roberts' Great Northern Diver, which visualises the city as a living poem. But it was our job as a Studios and Galleries team to work with Alice quite closely, to deal with the artwork, handle it, install it, and stretch the textile fabric onto these frames.
Cool. Right. Technical challenges. Yeah, take your pick. There was quite a lot along the way. Bearing in mind this is the first time that our team have worked on an installation of this scale with so many other facets involved. The first thing was just to make sure that what we were putting up was safe, as with everything that we do at MMU. So the canvases, we had to ensure that they were fire retardant. In this instance, we found that the fire retardant material that was sprayed onto the canvases actually loosens the fibres. Usually it toughens the canvas up and makes it less malleable, but in this instance it actually made the fibres a lot looser. So usually this would make things a bit easier, but in this case, it made things a bit more difficult, as in when you're pulling and stretching the canvas to fit, you're in danger of distorting some parts of the image.
We had an installation programme where the technical team, so the galleries and studio teams, they advised on, we actually changed the schedule because they tested the fabric, and the plan was that we would have the fireproofing done once the stretching had taken place, but we had to revise that because when they tested the fabric, rather than tightening as you would predict, it kind of slackened. So we had to do the fireproofing before the stretching. So that was kind of invaluable. That was it kind of showed the responsibility and the care that team took in kind of testing and predicting what might happen. And this was completely unexpected. That's completely the reverse of what you would assume would happen with fabric. So that was a really kind of critical moment.
So this is the stretcher workshop where we show students how to make stretchers, stretch the canvas around them that they've got, or linen or calico. And then we also show them what suitable primers there are to put on top of that, and different oils, varnishes and glazes that they can use with their paintings. Usually, ordinarily, when we are stretching canvas around our timber frame that we've made, we're able to treat the material with a series of different potions and lotions which help prepare the fabric for painting upon. So the most common of them is rabbit skin glue, which you can see tightens it up to the almost like a drum around the frame. Now, the issue we had with Alice Kettle's work is because the material was printed on and because it had been worked into, we couldn't apply any form of coatings or sizes to it to help stretch the material or to make the material uniform tightness. We just had to deal with it raw. So we were facing different challenges when not using raw material.
So we had all of the fabric ready. It was fireproofed, and then we had to kind of invent a system of stretching, which again was quite complex because if you can imagine, this had a design which across these 10 panels in one case and 7 in another, and the imagery had to read across all different panels. So it required a really expert and adaptable approach to the stretching, and they were totally extraordinary. So they devised a whole system where we tested one and worked out how it also had to comply with this kind of margin of, I think it was 1.5 millimeter give we had in the building when they were installed. So we had to work out a way to stretch individual panels, which would actually not conflict with these kind of margins, the margin gaps when they were installed. And so I have to say, they were extraordinary. They were incredibly expert and wonderful.
There were 17 frames for us to stretch the fabric round, which in itself was a problem because each frame had a separate specific pattern which needed to match up to the next frame. So you can see here, there's 9 frames on this wall, I think. It looks like one continuous piece, but it's actually several different patterns matching up. Normally in the stretcher workshop, we would only stretch canvases perhaps 2 meters, literally because that's all we can fit outside the workshop. On top of that, when you stretch canvas, normally the weave's very predictable and runs across itself. So when you stretch it, you know how it's going to behave and it's very uniform. Whereas because Alice had worked into her fabric with different types of fabric, different techniques on there, the material wasn't uniform in its properties, shall we say. So some bits stretched a lot more than others, and other bits were really stubborn and didn't have any movement in them at all. So that meant there was no predicting where the patterns would lie. Cut that out.
We had to be very mindful of the fact that when you've got such a large canvas, you've got the material, but there's a lot of stitching that's on it as well. So you can imagine that you've got a canvas, when you're trying to pull it, the bit of bare canvas without stitching on it is going to give quite easily, whereas the bit of canvas that's got lots of stitching and lots of sewing on is going to be less freely available to pull and stretch. So when you're trying to pull the whole canvas and get it taut, we're in danger of stretching the blank canvas further than the stuff that has got lots of stitching on it.
When stretching raw canvas or linen or calico, you can also use pliers, or canvas pliers as they're called, which saves your hands from being shredded to bits but we couldn't use them here again because some parts of the fabric were quite delicate, other parts were very solid, but you had to feel really with your hands how tight you were pulling it, on what effect that was having on the fabric. To get to that optimum level of tension on the fabric was a real struggle on the hands, really. And the other thing was that we normally would stretch a canvas, you'd put the canvas flat with the stretcher on top of that and stretch around the back, whereas because we needed to see the pattern at all times on these stretchers, we had it the wrong way up, meaning we had to climb under the table to staple underneath, so we could make sure all the patterns continued to line up. So that the actual physical stretching element of it was difficult. Some were smooth as you like, really, and that's because they had a big bleed on them, meaning that we had a bit of room to play with in terms of the image not having to fit exactly the outline of the stretcher. Some were a bit tighter than that, though. So we had Alice had kindly sewn some bleeds on for us to make life a bit easier. Alice was great in that sense that she brought spare fabric with that in mind, thinking something like that may happen, and it did do, of course. However, there was the actual seams where the two pieces of fabric came together. At times, they were sitting on the very edge of the wooden stretcher, and because they were different materials or different coloured materials, that was really obvious when they went together to make the big picture. So we're always looking out for hiding seams around the sides of the wooden frames so as to allow the image to flow smoothly. Ideally, it would have been like an extension of the pattern on each edge, but not the bits you would actually see. Because then even if a bit of the bleed came around the front or too much of the pattern went around the back, it would still be very similar colour on the divide. But with having the extra sewn on bits, which were different colours, if they came around the front, it was glaringly obvious. It sort of made like it highlighted the gaps on it.
I think for them, what was really interesting for me was that I'm used to working with textile print, and so I think they realised that this was, this is a different kind of material from the average painting, and they had a deep understanding of how to adapt and understand its properties, and were very reassuring, and did it really carefully and with great, and I felt very supported by that, because I was feeling very nervous and anxious, and they were very expert. So, and I think it's a testament to them that it looks so beautiful. And it is complex because it's not just the surface, it's all the kind of fold over and making sure that the back, which you can't see, is all properly installed for the long term, for its we're talking about many years ahead. So there's lots of kind of preparation and work that is invisible, which is about its kind of longevity.
So one of the techniques that we deployed that we've not used before was using strips of webbing on the back of the stretcher, and then having to staple down the canvas onto the webbing to keep it as flat as possible. The reason for this was because the framing that's already been put up on the wall was on such thin rails it didn't have any space at the back to hang. So keeping it as flat as possible, as well as working on such a large scale, presented a few hair-raising moments.
The issues we had was that the stretchers had been made by another company, but they didn't allow for a bevel, and a bevel would have been a sort of gradient on the front of the fabric, so that the fabric didn't touch the wood, so you couldn't see a sort of the wood frame through the front surface. So they had to devise a system which would kind of mitigate against that problem, which they did, which was fantastic. So they devised this clever system of using webbing, and again we had to be very careful that it didn't compromise this gap margin. So they were clever. They were very good, and very beautifully. The back almost looked better than the front.
So this is the beading that we'd normally apply to a stretcher or strainer to space the fabric away from the frame around it. And if you don't have this bead here, you'll see the silhouette of the frame pushes into the fabric.
I think really what you would always think that fundamentally what made this more difficult and what makes the stretching of any fabric that's already been printed on or already been painted on, as opposed to it just being raw fabric, you always want to have your image or your fabric with whatever it is on it in front of you before you make the wooden stretcher for it. I think it was more difficult here because at no point did we have the wooden stretcher and the fabric in the same place until the day we were doing it, you know. One other thing in terms of when we actually were handing the work over to be mounted on the wall was that once we'd stretched the fabric round the back and folded the corners over, there was quite a bulge of fabric which sat proud of the bracket on the back of the stretchers. So they were then getting in the way of hooking them onto the wall. So normally you would just leave the folded corners on the back, but we had to cut round these bulges and then use a EVA glue, which is pH neutral, which essentially means there's no horrible chemicals in there that are going to damage the artwork over time. And now, because this artwork is going to stay up for such a prolonged period of time, fingers crossed, it was important that it wouldn't erode or get damaged as time went by, essentially. That was the last hurdle we had, I guess, before they all went up there.
Because we are working with architects, estates and contractors, we had to be very flexible, and they were amazing. And also because there are lots of building regulations that we had to, so this balancing of building regulations, architectural vision and art school practice had to kind of come together. And I have to say, I think the technical team, the art school technical team, were the kind of centre of that, and were really, you know, they made it possible. And they had to coordinate with the contractors. So that was really, so there was a lot of kind of dialogue and kind of really sort of careful planning, but also adapting to that period of installation just to get it absolutely critically spot on.
I think we were probably the second technical team back on site at that time. The contractors who were assisting in the install as well, who hadn't handled artwork before, so that was a big thing to keep an eye on. Also, another challenge, probably just working with the multiple parties, and so we had our technical team of 3 to 4 depending which day, because we were still split teams. Also, the time frame that we had was a week. Under normal conditions, I think it would have probably taken us a couple of days to stretch the actual canvases, but I think it led to a full week in the end. A couple of days before we were breaking up for Christmas also, so there was a lot of pressures involved. We had the buildings team, the facilities project manager also coordinating, and also technical services project manager coordinated, so there's lots of different parties to be diplomatic with, I suppose. Make sure we had a good relationship with all the subcontractors and different parties involved, especially Alice as well, who was absolutely fantastic in working with the team.
It was a very happy, positive, enjoyable time, because we enjoyed working with each other. Well, I certainly enjoyed working with them.
Thanks, guys. That was great. Jedi, have any questions coming through the chat yet?
Not yet. We've not had any question yet. If you would like to ask a question, can you unmute yourself and ask away, please?
And the other thing I'd say is we are going to be sharing that video as part of our, I just realised my video's off. We are going to be sharing that as part of our package of resources at the end of the day, so that more people who couldn't attend the session live are going to be able to see it. And if any questions come in that way, we will be collecting the questions and sending them over. Yeah, thanks, Liam. I agree. I thought the video was great.
Yeah, sorry, I just wonder if you were to do that project again, is there anything that you would change about the way you did it?
Yeah, not having COVID would have been a great thing. I think that was, yeah. I think with exhibition work, a lot of the time we get the artwork last minute. So we have to be kind of prepared to adapt and change on the fly anyway. So we're pretty used to doing that as a team, but it's always close to the wire. Yeah. But doing things differently, I would have probably had more staff assisting, definitely. But due to COVID, we couldn't get everybody on site.
Well, well done. It was a great example of teamwork. It really was. Good to see.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you very much.
And then is it difficult at all or intimidating when you first of all begin those conversations, you know, with the artist who is steering the whole thing? Because obviously it's coming from their vision, but the realities of it are sort of determined by you guys. Is it kind of hard to establish that relationship first of all?
I'd say because we're all fairly creative, or we're artists, or we have like a kind of creative background. So I'd say it's kind of like we kind of do understand the sort of thing. It isn't too much trouble usually, and I suppose that's why it's important that as technicians we sometimes do have that within the team. At least have that.
That was actually going to be my follow-up question. Was
do
you all, you know, have arts backgrounds, and do you feel that working on other people's projects, do you feel like that scratches your own creative itches, or do you find that's your work during the day and then you want to take that away and do other things yourselves?
Yeah, I think it can go either way, really. I think a lot of the time, because you've got your technical head on, even though you're sympathetic towards the sort of artists that you're working with situation, you're still looking at it in a slightly different way. Whereas, like, if you finish work and you're off to the studio, then you've switched back to being an artist then, and you've got you still got your technical head on, but you're more on the artist side. So you sort of shift between the two a little bit, I think, when you're at work. But yeah, it's like Owen says, I think it's good that I've come from that background largely, because we do understand the sort of anxieties that most of the artists that we work with have, really. Yeah.
All right. Joanne, would you like to please unmute yourself and ask away your question?
Yeah, I was just wondering whether the artwork's going to stay in situ or whether it's going to move on at some point, and if it moves on, will you be involved in installing it elsewhere?
There aren't any current plans to move it, so one thing that we will need to do is go up in a scissor lift and clean it periodically with a hoover, which will be quite tedious, but very necessary. But yeah, as in, I think it's due to stay as a permanent piece of artwork in the Grosvenor building.
Bagsy not hoovering it.
Yeah, I'll second that. Bagsy not hoovering it.
Thank you. I was just wondering, how long do projects like this usually take you to do on the average?
They're all quite subjective. With Alice's one, it really was sort of a design on the spot. We are given a certain time frame to work. I think one of my guys, correct me if I'm wrong, like we had there's a few weeks of preparation, but the install itself, as Adam said, because of COVID and the restrictions, it did take 2 weeks to put up, so we had to circumnavigate the different problems. But, you know, the scope of installations that we do, they're all subjective. You know, something like Alice's, which is one artist, one piece, we can concentrate on it, maybe consolidate the time down. A lot of logistics involved with something like that would be 2 weeks, but we've just finished doing an MA show, which is multiple different students, different artworks, which is a lot of different elements put together. And we had even less time to put that up, whereas we have other installations that are a lot more, I wouldn't say precise is the word, but there's a lot more involved, but there's less to look at, you know, a lot more behind the scenes. So we do sometimes get more time, but again, it's very subjective. It depends what's, you know, what the timetable's saying really, and, you know, what we're up against, but we're very good at getting square pegs to fit round holes. So yeah, start the clock.
Thank you. Liam, do you mind unmuting yourself and asking your question, please?
Sure. What a great video, first and foremost. So I was interested. Who put that together then? Was that like a collaborative thing between you guys, or was there other technicians that were brought in to do the filming of it as well?
Owen thankfully produced the whole video pretty much on his own, and he also, in the true sense of being a technician, learnt a lot of editing software on the spot. So we really put him on the spot with that. So yeah, big thanks, Owen.
I think there's potentially another career for Robin in the waiting, as well as a TV personality. I definitely thought that shone through. But no, my question was, so the bit where you twizzled the glue gun and then it didn't quite go. It's just perfect comedy timing. The question I had was, what's next? You know, what's the next project? Because I think almost like every project that you sort of like your reference that you've worked on in the past, and this one particularly, you know, there's so many different things that myself looking at something on a wall would be going, that's absolutely beautiful, but just didn't understand the complexities and the collaboration with architects and all that kind of stuff that went around it. So it was really enlightening for me. I just wondered what you were working on next and how complex that one's going to be.
So we've got an exhibition called Fully Awake, which is a painting exhibition. I think it's roughly around 45 paintings, fine art. So we'll be hanging those next week. Also, we've got the day-to-day inductions with students, installing students' work, helping those. So we've got a lot of plates spinning a lot of the times, and in the background there's always exhibition work going on, professional exhibition work as well. So and then we've got BA shows to start planning for next year as well, which will be great to actually get our work up as well. So yeah, we're looking forward to that. We've got quite a few exhibitions up until Christmas, so, but the next one is Fully Awake, which will be in the Holden Gallery, which yeah, should be quite amazing and great. It's great to be hanging work again, to be honest. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Good luck with it. Thanks very much.
Yes, I was wondering, in terms of your overall workload, how do you stay on top of that? Because there must be the regular things, like you say, student inductions, exhibitions, things like that you know you have to do at fixed times throughout the year. But then when another big thing comes in, yeah, I mean, how do you cope with that? Because sometimes you said sometimes it's at short notice where you actually have the full details of what it's going to be and things like that. Yeah, how do you guys deal with that, if you do deal with that?
Alcohol. No, I'm joking. No, we try and book people into the workshops sort of like a week or two in advance at least, and then we normally know if we've got to do something big like that, we normally know a little bit in advance. So if we can see when it's going to be, you just try and get more people in through the workshop the week before that, and sort of promise people that they can come in the week after and try and keep that bit free. But if that's not possible, then there is quite a few of us. So perhaps two of us will stay back and do the sort of day-to-day workshop stuff, and then there'll be the rest of us can go and do the job in hand. And you know, we're quite sort of fairly flexible in that sense. But yeah, it can be quite a lot really at times, to be honest. Like recently we've been putting the MA show up and all the students have been back at the same time. So it is a bit of a juggling act, really. But yeah, we're actually all like 20 years older than we look.
I think to add to that as well is that we all have our own specialties. So, but we're all quite good at adapting to each other's, picking up each other's students, and not actually picking them up, but taking on board their work as well and covering them. Out of the 6 of us, we multi sort of disciplined as well, so that's really important. So when I'm coordinating who's doing what, it's good to know that people can drop on some other stuff. And to be part of the team, you have to be pretty adaptable.
All right. MMC 39G has got a question. Yeah, thank you.
Hiya, I'm not quite sure why my name isn't. That's not my real name. I really enjoyed the video, guys. It's great to see another an art subject being represented on one of these forums. I feel we are slightly underrepresented. But anyway, I don't really have any great insightful questions. Just, I presume you guys generally work together as a team. If so, how does that work? Who delegates what? And what about when you're not working as a team? Yeah, how do you manage, like, who does what? Yeah, just generally, how does that type of distributing the workload go?
So generally, I coordinate the workload for the team, but the technical officers will coordinate their own, and we'll have a shared calendar pretty much, and it's quite a simple system. So we can all see what each other's doing, and we'll input day to day. We'll have a morning toolbox meeting every single day, more or less. So yeah, it's about us being really visible with each other of what workload we've got on, and communicating quite a lot, and me coordinating that, make sure everybody's doing what we need to do, basically. But yeah, ultimately the responsibility lands on me, so it's good, but everybody's really good at inputting their own data on what they're doing, so that's a big part of it, really.
Yeah, it's communication and us working dynamically, definitely. I think, as mentioned earlier, like we've all got our specialities and that, but we are able to jump into each other's shoes. So, whoever's more adept to dealing with a certain job, they can go and do it, and then the remainder of our team can jump in and fill that hole. But as I said, it's about communication and working dynamically, and having Adam coordinate it. God bless you, Adam.
What about, say one of you guys, God forbid, was to leave or whatever, would you always get an automatic replacement? What if you had a project on, I know that you mentioned earlier you wanted more staff. Is there any scope for you guys getting, say, someone in temporarily, or some sort of a modern apprentice type?
Yeah, so at the moment we've got 2 casual workers with us, and on the bigger shows like the MA show, we'll try to get casual workers in. They're not always fully trained, but they kind of have to learn on the job quite a lot, so it's really good experience for them. They tend to be graduates as well, so they will have come from an art background, but also be wanting to learn practical skills, which we can show them along the way. But a lot of the time it is manual labour, lifting, moving, logistics, that sort of thing. So it's good to have casual help now and again, just to pick up the strain.
Thank you. Leon?
Me again. Collective question for you all, but may fall to Owen. So I'm the operations and engagement manager at Heated. And one of the things that we are really keen to promote as much as possible at all times is arts technicians. And I think historically he hasn't necessarily hit that nail directly on the head as it could do. So one of the things that we're always looking to do is to highlight and to showcase people's work and that kind of stuff. So would you guys have any problem with us hosting that video on our website? I suppose ultimate decision has come to Owen as creative director. I'm not entirely sure how that works, but would you guys be happy to promote the work that you're doing at MMU on the Heated website?
No, definitely. Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, okay. Brilliant.
Fantastic. If I follow up with yourself then, Owen, would that be the best?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, I'll get your email from Natalie.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
I don't think we've got any more questions. Over to you, Jared.
Great, thanks, Diddy. I mean, that times very nicely, just finishing with a minute to spare. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining. That was great, and really great to hear from you all at the end afterwards. And actually, Liam, I can connect you with Owen straight afterwards. I just realised, obviously, I've got the details from this session. So in terms of the programme for the day, we're actually now taking a little break in the programme for lunch, and there's also some networking. The link, if you want to join the networking, is on the personal agendas that you'll have been sent through. If you have lost your personal agenda, the full agenda is now available on the NTDC website as well, so you can find the link. And as a final reminder, my colleague Jedi is going to be posting the link for the Padlet in the chat. If you do have any comments or questions on how the NTDC can better support the technical sector, we'll be collecting those throughout the day and getting to them at the end of the day. So finally, yeah, just a great big thanks to the team for the video and the session as well. That was really enjoyable. I think we all got a lot out of it, and we'll be sharing that later. And yeah, thanks everyone.